Okay, this is my webcast on literary analysis for the end of session 1 of the Peyton Online Academy English 12 course. When we talk about literary analysis, we are talking about the mature form of writing about literature. Our goal early in English education, in primary school, and in many places through middle school, where you have a separate reading class, is to both to learn to write in order to communicate and to express yourself, and also to learn to read and to improve reading skills. By the time we come to this course, you're in your 13th year of school, and we're no longer learning to read. We're now reading to learn. That is, we read material not so much to practice basic reading skills as to improve our ability to encounter new ideas, deal with challenging language, and learn from the experience. Literary analysis, rather than being designed to prove that you read the material, like much writing connected to a reading course in middle school or elementary school, which is focused around recall and presentation of enough facts and details from the reading to prove that you took it in, is meant to join a discussion of the literature and the ideas it contains. Now, the word analysis obviously comes from to analyze. It is the the noun form of the verb to analyze. It's the process of analyzing. And to analyze means to break something down into its parts in order to better understand those parts and how they constitute the whole. So, what we do in literary analysis is to take the large vocabulary we have of literary terms, everything from plot to alliteration and all the narrative and poetic techniques in between, identify what is present in a story, novel, play, or poem as we read it, and then, having identified those things, look for a way to explain them, their presence, or how they are used, what the author does with them, that would be engaging to someone else who has already read the text and that would help them to understand it better. So it's not enough then in writing this paper to try to prove to me that you've read the book. You'll do that if you do the paper well, but the goal isn't just to say, I've read it, but to say, you know what, I read it, I thought about the ideas and themes that it engages, and here's what I learned, here's what I understood from the text. So, a couple of pointers, and the other page in this folder, which is How to Write a Critical Analysis, Chapter 9 of a book called Writing with Style by John R. Trimble, is a very good discussion by an excellent professor of how to write a critical analysis. I want to hit a couple of points and then stop, and I really suggest you read his paper. Number one, we start with the assumption that the audience knows what we're talking about. This is more like discussing a movie that you love with friends who have also seen it and love it than it is telling someone about a movie they haven't seen yet. We assume they know the basics and that we can get right to our understanding and our opinions without having to set up all the background for them. Now, you may find yourself writing on occasion for a specific audience that needs that background. That's why we've talked about rhetoric and the rhetorical triangle. You have to know your audience. But generally speaking, much of the background material is eliminated except where it is relevant to your interpretation, because we're assuming that the audience knows the background material. Second, you want to make an argument. Your goal is to discuss or debate something, not necessarily to present something really obvious that is irrefutable, that no one will disagree with. I could write a scientific paper, I'm sure, that would prove that the sun is going to come up tomorrow, but nobody cares because everybody already knows the sun is coming up tomorrow. Likewise, if your literary analysis is an argument that Hamlet is the protagonist of Hamlet, nobody cares. We know that's true already. Now, if you were to try to argue that someone else is the protagonist of Hamlet, and you could make a good case for it with proof from the text, that would be exciting because it's debatable. People would disagree on it. So if you try to play it safe by simplifying your argument and choosing something that you feel is really easy to prove, what happens is often it takes almost no argument to prove it, and so you end up padding the paper to get to the end with tons and tons of summary and getting a really bad grade. Now, you are going to have to summarize, paraphrase, and quote from the text, and that's fine, but you should only do so as much as necessary to prove your point. We quote in small bits, we summarize and paraphrase in small bits to give the evidence necessary from the text itself to prove the arguments we are making. Okay, so far, one, assume that your audience knows what's going on and that your job is not to tell them the story, but to help them understand something about the story in a new way. Two, assume that you need an argument that is debatable. Your statement should be something that another reader might have missed or might disagree with. It shouldn't be something obvious and easily proven. The third point about assumptions is that you do not have to be afraid of getting it wrong or getting the code wrong. And you don't have to come out with something outlandish that is ridiculous given the context of the book, the piece of literature, and the history that we know. You are welcome to use research to fill your facts. You are welcome to apply different ideas or religions to the text and see how they interact, how they help you understand it. But primarily, you're going to read the book carefully, find something interesting, and then go, oh, how does that work? Or why does that happen? So I would suggest a few specific how-tos. One, look for questions as you're reading, places where the book goes, makes you ask how or why questions. How and why are generally interpretive questions because they require us to explain what's on the page, not just repeat it in order to provide an answer. So they're a good way to find a thesis. Remember, though, that those how or why questions are the lead to a thesis. Your thesis will be the answer to that how or why question. I have a few students who remember the how and why every year and then don't state their thesis because they just answer the question and, they just ask the question at the beginning of the paper and then without stating the thesis, move immediately to proving the answer. And so the thesis shows up at the very end of the paper if it shows up at all. You don't want to write a paper where the thesis is only implied. That's not going to do you any good. Okay, so for this assignment, you will be looking back at Beowulf or one of the other pieces that we read in this chapter from the medieval period that follows the Anglo-Saxon period, so Geoffrey Chaucer or the ballads or the play Everyman, and writing a literary analysis, 1 to 3 pages, in which you share with us something that you learned or understood from the text. I can read that poem over and over and over again. But no matter how many times I read it, I won't know what you understood. I won't know what you thought of it unless you share that with me. Neither will anybody else. So that's our goal here, that you write a short argument that explains to us what you've learned from reading the text and what in the text helped you come to that conclusion. All right, guys, thanks.